Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand. Brian Shaw in studio next to me. Meat scientist Diana Clark. How are you?
I'm doing pretty fantastic, actually.
It's a great topic today.
It
and
is.
Also manning our third Rode studio microphone here is not Chef Tony Biggs, but he is behind Chef Tony's microphone. Yes. Does it have
Smells a little funny.
Does it really? Tony loves fish sauce, so
That's it.
yeah, you might get
That's what it is.
If you don't know that voice, you haven't heard him since season 1, but making his valiant return to the podcast, the man all things barbecue and curly locks. I'm so jealous of his hair. Chef Michael Ollier, how you doing?
Oh, fantastic. Beautiful day above the grass, as we say, right?
Delightful. If you saw the title of the episode and you're like, what exactly is Pectoralis profundus, right? And we can tack onto that Pectoralis superficialis. Mind you, I only know these words because Diana told me, and I'm just repeating them, right? And I like to sound intelligent But Diana, what are these cuts? What are we talking about today?
All right, so pect meat, pectoralis, you have your brisket. I mean, it's actually comprised of two muscles. I know a lot of barbecue people know this, but you have your point and your flat. So your point is actually your pectoralis superficialis. So the easiest way to remember that, it's super. Everyone knows it's full of that marbling, that moisture. So that's how you can kind of connect those two.
That's where burn ends come from.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, and I think everyone loves burn ends, regardless of how they're prepared. And then you have the pectoralis profundus, that's the flat. So those two muscles, sometimes if you're not really familiar with barbecue, you don't realize that there's two, but it's really crucial to know that because their grains run in different directions. So when you're slicing, it's great to line those up in order to cut against the grain. But that flat has less marbling than the point does. But then also moving into that, there's just a lot of confusion within names when it comes to the brisket itself. I mean, there's the term decal, there's the term web, there's first cut, second cut, and half of these I don't truly understand. So this is why, again, we just need to go back to the Latin terms, and I think everyone would be better at this.
I do not see us in the barbecue world saying, how did your superficialis profundus turn out?
And I would respond, super. Right? Come on. It goes hand in hand. I just think it would work out perfectly.
It's crystal clear when you explain it that way. I mean, is it that difficult to remember Pectoralis superficialis? Right?
See? I mean, Brian gets it.
Chef Ollier, you cook a lot, but you spend a good chunk of your time as well in the barbecue circuit, right? Obviously, brisket, depending on what region of barbecue you're in, has a role in various ways of barbecue. But can you walk us through, from an eating perspective, the differences between the point and the flat? Diana talked about the difference in marbling. It's a pretty big difference, though, right? I mean, you're not going to mistake.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to continue the discussion just a little bit about verbiage, because I think we should set the record straight with how we'd like even barbecue folks to communicate in a way that's okay. It's not going to happen in the Latin terms, Di. Let's recognize that and move forward with what we think would be really good for all of us to communicate on the same page. You hear lean and moist a lot, meaning lean being in the flat and moist, obviously, the point. How else is that the best way? Like, how can we say, all right, point and flat, that's pretty good. Lean and moist, we get that. Do you think that's good to start there?
When you go to the consumer, they're going to understand lean and moist better than point and flat. So that might honestly be the best way to translate that to them. And then throughout barbecue world, everyone can get that, but yeah.
Okay, and then let's just eliminate the term decal so we can have accuracy, because decal does not mean point. And let's keep decal off of it, because the decal's been removed in the Packer brisket.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Clear that up for the barbecue folks.
Do you want to say, what is the decal? Is it
the
it's
decal
fat,
is
right?
the fat that sits on top of the flat itself. So you have your sternum bone that usually sits there, and then you have this big layer of fat, and then the flat sits there. So that has been removed. Decal technically means cover in Old German, so you're removing that cover. So I understand why some people call the point the decal because I can say that it's the cover, but it's not. And
Yeah.
if you go back to the NAMI guidelines, so the just those guidebook for cutting in terms of beef fabrication, pork and lambs in there too, but they specifically say that decal is the fat cover on the brisket.
So I guess
Okay.
we can understand how it came that way with the
Yeah.
decal, right? But let's avoid saying that. When you get those Packer briskets in, like restaurateurs, or when you buy them that way, you even see, brisket,
yes.
full brisket decal off, and people are like, "Hey, my point's gone." No, that's not it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not it. So okay, we've got that cleared up. Brian, back to your original question. Is it about how different those two cuts perform?
Yeah, because the one term, you were talking about how they're right, moist and lean, right? I've also heard the brisket point called the fatty brisket. You want it fatty or you want it lean, right?
Yeah, so when you're ordering barbecue, it's
Yeah.
fatty or lean. True. When
Yeah.
you go to the joints and you're like, okay, I want a plate full by the pound or quarter pound, whatever it is, you
Yeah.
ask for fatty or lean.
Yeah, and I've heard it said that, well, with consumers in mind, they'll be turned off by calling something fatty, which is funny because my brain works in the opposite way. I'm like, fatty side or lean?
I'm with you.
I
Fatty
mean,
equals delicious.
yeah, right.
And that's why, burn ends will come from the point. The reality of this cut is, to Di's point about the grain going different directions, that's one challenge. But the fact that both of these cuts put together is pretty much like God's challenge to the barbecue world.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate challenge, because you've got a cut on the lean that needs to be babied in a way where the point could handle that heat. So protection of heat is what the point can provide while cooking a full brisket. There's a strong case for separating the two before you even cook them, so you could cook them independently and have success, because one's going to need different cooking technique than the other. We do talk a lot about how Texas brisket, the way traditional Texas brisket is cooked, is the way. But if you follow the pounds of the brisket, for example, and you follow the pounds that move through commerce, think of how many different ways this cut is cooked.
Yeah,
Brined,
that's true. Yeah.
corned, right? It's pastrami, it's corned beef.
Mm-hmm.
What else is it? I mean, we think of it as like, to me, it's like, bunch of black pepper, salt, black pepper, post oak, and it's that is the ultimate. But grind, I mean, it's
Yeah.
now
Oh,
considered
yeah, it's
amazing
gourmet.
in grind to be the ultimate, because it has such a strong oleic. I don't want to go sciencey, but it tastes amazing. And maybe you can dive into that. But that's just kind of the foundations. Let's just think broader about what brisket is in our world. It's different to different people, is the point. It could be ropa vieja, right? The long grain direction on the
That'd be
the
perfect,
lean
yeah.
is an ideal ropa vieja instead of traditionally flank, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, can you get into that a little bit? The brisket, because of the way it's made, it is a challenge, right? It's not easy to know what to do with it. I mean, a lot of different ways that it's been prepared. I've actually had it sous vide before, and it's been fantastic. Yeah. But this, if you go back over the generations, this is a cut that exists because, like a lot of foods that have come into the mainstream, I mean, it was the leftover stuff. It was the stuff that poor people could afford, right? I mean, that's really the origins of barbecue everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, and you think about smoking. I mean, the main reason why they did it was for preservation. So it really wasn't. They had some cuts that they really didn't know what to do with. So you think about the brisket, it didn't really sell. Let's throw it on the smoker, cook for a while, and then we can have a great shelf life on it. And I mean, you've salted it, smoked it, you've kind of provided that natural preservation. So it's just amazing over time. I feel like now it's become that comfort food, and now it's that sought out destinational food. I mean, people travel all over the U.S., globally even, to try this different barbecue. And it's neat seeing it actually go global, because at first I feel like it was more U.S. based, but now you're starting to see all these other teams come in from all over the world competing in these barbecue competitions. And that's where you see a lot of even science thrown into cooking, of trying to make sure that one bite that everyone takes is just fantastic. And it's amazing to see the prep that goes into it. But still, the beauty of that brisket, that it could be found in anyone's backyard, and it really does just take salt and pepper, and it's still going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be a great experience, and that's why it's a great cut for so many people to work with. And I think people can get a little afraid of it, but really it's not it's never going to be bad. I've never had anyone say this is a bad brisket. I've had really great briskets, but I don't think I've ever had a bad one.
Yeah, I mean, my default with with beef in general is if you cook something long enough, low enough, slow enough, like eventually it's going to surrender anyway, right? Now the brisket is ideal for this because there's so much fat in the brisket, and we invite actually rabbit holes on here. There's another episode I invite you to go back. It's just called fat, right? It's not describing me necessarily, although I mean it kind of does. But it's all about the science behind fat and the different types of fat. Brisket fat is special though, right?
Oh yeah, that has more oleic acid in there. So that oleic fatty acid. So that episode that we're talking about was just amazing in order to really dive deep into the science behind the different fat depots in the carcass. But the fact that brisket has that more oleic fatty acid actually is a more satiating fat to the human palate. So people desire it more, and it melts at lower temperatures as well. And this is why you're finding brisket more in those gourmet grinds, because they want that ground beef to have that ultimate flavor in there too.
Yeah. Now, do you know, when you're talking about those grinds, and of course the en vogue one is always brisket chuck short rib, right?
Yeah.
Is actual brisket lean going in there, or is really the brisket component the fat that they're putting in?
I'd say it's more the fat that's going in there than anything, because that's what they're trimming off at the packing plant. And you see more in retail brisket flats than anything. You don't always find points being sold separately.
Yeah.
So those might even be thrown into grinds as well. Which is fantastic that's where that fat source is coming from. And if you guys do have a chance to listen to that, cattle that marble more, so that have higher marbling levels, they actually have more oleic fatty acid found throughout their entire carcass, meaning that certified Angus beef briskets should have more oleic acid than just your traditional USDA choice.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which, drawing the link between brisket is therefore a healthy superfood.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It's the new avocado.
It's very accurate there.
All right. So if we could, and I know we've got a nice array of listeners in our audience, and some are chefs, some are meat salesmen, some are people who just love meat, right? And the weekend warriors, right? I happen to be standing in the room here with, this building is certified Angus beef, right? We have smokers. We have lots of different people here who can cook, even beyond the 6 actual by title chefs that we have on staff here. I am standing in a room with honestly 2 of the best smokers that we have here on staff. I mean, your briskets, I like to say that I've eaten more than my fair share. But if you guys could walk us through that, because if you follow Facebook message boards, things like, everybody says, what's the best way to smoke this? What's the best way to handle this, right? Start us with a whole packer brisket. How are you getting that to from start to finish and for your best results?
I'll start us off, and I'll have Di kind of chime in, because I think she may have cooked more pounds over her time, at least here.
Yeah.
But we do so much experimenting with the cut in not just smoking. I'll just mention that in recipe development here. So beyond just Texas style, which we're about to get into, but using a Dutch oven to cook a brisket, just cutting it and braising it, cutting it in cubes and braising it. So many creative ways we try to use, like the Instant Pot, which is such a big, device in people's kitchens now. So by searing it and braising in that, the grind, experimenting with burgers. So we do a lot of different things than just the traditional. But let's walk through a packer brisket on how at least we've experienced it in Texas style and how we do it here, which is pretty much a light trim on it. We take the excess fat that exists between that fat and the point on the one side. We trim up excess around. You can really feel that when you get it, because it's a harder fat because it's such a collection of it. Mm-hmm. We trim that off, and then we use a pretty aggressive amount of kosher salt and cracked pepper. But the pepper we like to use is a lot of these professionals will use. It's a dustless pepper. Mm-hmm. So you don't have the powder that can create kind of a putty over its first time in the smoker, meaning it gets a little pasty. Mm-hmm. So you don't want that fine powder. You want a consistent, coarse pepper grind. And so we use a mesh, a specific that's dustless, they call it, and it's a 16-18 mesh pepper. Mm-hmm. But it's black pepper, salt, on a brisket. It's pretty simple. And then we put it in a cooker. And so that smoker could be, we have a stick burner. So we have a Southern Pride that uses, and it's gas assist, and we use that and it rotates. At home, you probably don't have a Southern Pride. I imagine most people don't in their backyard. But if it's a pellet, that works great. Something that consistently can give you that. And we lay smoke on it for, X amount of time. So that cooker, we try to have it about 225. I like to dabble in that a little between 210 and 225. I like to go lower for a longer amount of time. But point is, smoking is usually around 225 until, and this is where we can get into debate, like how long? Because I like I do like a strong smoke flavor, but I don't like that acrid, bitter. And so a clean smoke. And that's important. You don't put we don't put our briskets in before the smoke has been cleared out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like a clear smoke that runs. So you start your cooker, then you get a clear smoke going, and then you put your brisket in. And then time that I crutch it.
Yeah, I
do you?
Yeah, I do.
So we wrap in foil at when the internal temp is around 160, 170.
Yeah.
We'll crutch it so we can protect moisture and then ride it out to our 195-ish. And some will, depending on what we're going to do with it. If it's going to be sliced, it ends there. But if it's going to be fall apart, then 202 or so. So are we on the same page, Di? Anything different?
That's really what we do at the center. And I have to say, look, that Southern Pride is amazing. Just the rotisserie factor, too, that you throw in there, you don't really have to worry as much about protecting the brisket, so to speak, from that direct heat. But that's something to really consider when you don't have that, of figuring out where exactly that heat source is flowing through. Because like we said, the point can take the heat more than the flat can. So make sure your point's facing that heat. There's the big debate on fat side up, fat side down. And we did a little test here at the Culinary Center, actually, with Jess, probably about 3 years ago now. But we were just looking at that, and if you have that direct heat, you want to make sure that the fat is basically protecting that more than anything.
That's Jess Prowl's Hardcore Carnivore, by the way.
Yes, yeah. But we also want to talk to just that one thing to really consider is that your smoke isn't really going to adhere the meat anymore once you reach 180 degrees on the external surface. So that is also why I'm very key of going lower, around that 200 to 210, because I really like the look of a smoke ring. I think it's really pretty. So the lower you go, the bigger the smoke ring you can get. And actually, there's a processor that I've talked to at Reciprocal Meat Conference. They actually start their briskets out in the smoker. Their smoker is around 150 degrees.
Seriously?
Wow. They do it so they can get a really thick smoke ring. So it's really neat, and they slowly will just increase that temperature. But honestly, once you hit that point where that external surface is 180, you can pull that brisket out and throw it in your oven for a more controlled smoke.
Because you're not going to get any more smoke on it.
Yeah, and I just had this conversation with our president on Friday. It's not always about cooking the best brisket. It's about the experience of sitting around the smoker, having a beer or whatever. And so you don't always have to do that. But if you're worried about temperature control, and let's say you get a brisket in, you've got 4 hours to kill, but then all of a sudden you have to run somewhere, just take it out and wrap it and put it in your oven. Set your oven to 200 and you're good. It's going to be that same heat source holding, and it will help you get through a lot easier. So, yeah, just a little tip.
Excellent. 180 is that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question, right? And I'm speaking as an amateur. I've made some briskets, right? It was good, right? It's not your good, but it was okay. If you're, how do you tell the difference? I guess there's a famous line from Kent Black, right? Who actually just went over to France a year or so ago and was cooking Texas style barbecue in France, right? Think about that, right? Kent Black at Bocuse, right? That's amazing. But I remember him saying that the brisket will tell you when it's done, right? What is the difference between 190, 195, and 202 in terms of what are you looking for to tell you that it's done?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because Di said earlier that she's never had a bad brisket, and I don't think she's tasted them coming out of my smoker then, because years ago, really practicing and working through and amateurs who are working on a competition thing, you've got to fail before you can succeed. And so I've had tons of failures on brisket. So I'm sorry you didn't. Well, I'm glad you didn't get to experience those failures.
Yeah. I don't know. It's still not like you could chew through anything, I feel like.
It is one of
It
those
fits.
things that's a feel in the end, right? So
Yeah.
it's got this kind of jiggle, and that's what a lot of them will talk about. Like if you just plop this thing down, it's going to have some movement back and forth, like a wave that goes through that jiggle.
Yeah.
And that's why so many that are intuitive with brisket can kind of push it, and they know, oh, it's got the jiggle. And so that's one thing that's got the jello jiggle kind of thing. That's a really good indicator. But really, we use a probe thermometer. I mean, we're pretty sciencey. We get kind of geeky, and we like meticulous cooks. And so I'll use a probe thermometer and rely on that pretty heavily so that it doesn't have to be one person's intuition that decides whether this fails or not. In the end, that's probably what supersedes everything else is that feel, right? But it's a good backup system to have a probe thermometer in, so you can measure that to take it.
Yeah.
Boy, exactly 195 to 202 is like that sliceable, and it doesn't break apart with a knife until like maybe break apart shred. But then resting time is another whole discussion.
Yeah.
Resting is where I think people fail more than anything.
I agree.
Is that they do not let briskets rest long enough. And I'm not talking like resting a roast for 15 minutes. It is well beyond that on what brisket needs to rest. It should rest 2+ hours.
Yes.
So that's the planning that you need to have in mind if you're going to serve this. Hey, the brisket's off the smoker. Then we have a couple more hours before you should enjoy that at least.
I do think that is the biggest at-home fail. Is just not resting. We actually just for Easter this year, that's what we did was brisket. And so we were at our in-laws' house, and I sat there and talked about calculating time and figuring out when to pull it. And I said, okay, well, so we'll pull it at 4. Like, well, we're not eating till 6. I'm like, yes.
Exactly.
And so they were, oh, it's going to be cold. I'm like, trust me.
It's going to be just fine,
just
right?
leave it alone. Like, you got to rest.
How much carryover cooking can you expect for it to, I mean, considering that you're cooking at such a low temperature, I mean, it's not like a steak where you're just like crushing it over direct heat. Is there going to be very much carryover from the temperature it is when you pull it till it's ready?
You should still have some carryover, especially if you're wrapping it too. You're going to have some of that heat in there, but it's not going to be crazy. Like you said, it's just that gentle. Because if you think about it, it's coming from a smoker that was roughly 200 to 225, and the internal temperature is 195. So it's already kind of moving real slow. Yeah. So you won't really have too much pushover. If anything, it's just going to be held right there. And that's just going to cause everything to break down a little bit more and really gelatinize. I mean, because that brisket is a really heavily used cut in the animal. I mean, it's the pect meat. So you guys think about, if you think about an animal itself, it's actually kind of cool. So the whole front 1/3 of the animal is held up really just by muscle. That blade bone does not connect into the spine. So if you're actually thinking about all of the weight that brisket has to hold up while it's moving, it's a lot. So you need that rest time to really just break everything down a little bit and make it that tender bite that you're looking for.
It's interesting. Anatomically, this is what I was thinking, right? The idea of like, I was thinking, most animals like that are pigs, cows, sheep, goats. Anatomically, they're all kind of the same, right? They've got the same parts, just different shapes, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I've actually had pork brisket.
Yes.
That was really good. But the chicken breast doesn't really compare, right? It's the leanest part, right?
Yeah, and they're different. Like they're anatomically they're different. They're not mammals, so that you have that difference between them. But yeah.
Well, Dr. Phil Bass used to say that chicken is technically a vegetable because it takes longer to get a vegetable to market than it does a chicken. So therefore,
could be pretty accurate.
They really are totally.
It's just foul. Anyway.
All right, before we wrap, let's have a conversation. If and I believe you guys were both there. Let's talk about the bone-in brisket, right? Our pal Daniel Vaughn from Texas Monthly wanted to play around with the bone-in brisket. Tell us about it.
Even John Lewis too.
Yeah, John Lewis
tried
took it home
Lewis
too.
Barbecue in South Carolina.
They both were here visiting at the Culinary Center and talked about how cool it would be to smoke a bone-in brisket, and we advised not to do it, but they wanted to take it home anyway, so we said, okay, that's fine. And both of them have said it took like 18 plus hours to cook because that bone acts as an insulator, so it's going to take a little bit longer to get that heat going through. And then it was a pain in the butt to actually slice it because now you have this giant bone in the way. And then when it comes down to the taste,
Yeah.
you didn't have any of that smoke actually getting into the meat because you had the fat and the bone covering it. You had very little lean present. And the lean is needed in order for that meat to actually take in the smoke. So they were fails.
What's interesting is that you can totally see the logic of wanting to go down that path. Like a bone attached, you're like, yeah,
Makes
that's
everything
gonna
cooler, right?
That's
That
makes it,
barbaric.
that's part of it. But with middle meats, less. It's more like you can see that. Oh, isn't that going to transfer some flavor in a low and slow cook? Isn't that going to be something more moist protection? Like, you can see all the reasons behind wanting to go down that path. So that's what's cool is that, hey, let's try it out and find out. Yeah. And now we can broadcast to the world like, okay, pause, don't do it. Yeah. We've gone there for you and you don't need to do it. But still, we're like, I think I can do it because I'm better than everyone else. And you just didn't do it right.
Now, we've also, we've dry aged a brisket as well, right?
Yeah, actually, so I think it was fantastic. When it came to the smoking process, the smoke really didn't stick to it too much, or we lost a lot of moisture during the dry aging process. Overall yields, though, funny enough, were pretty similar because you've lost the moisture before in the aging process instead of during the cooking process. But the flavor I thought was pretty awesome. I mean, just
it was pretty good. It's a dangerous path to recommend dry aging brisket and then cooking it like a traditional. It's just so much time on the shelf, and it's just not going to be a return at all.
In terms of your yields on
that, which yields on briskets anyway.
Yes,
are pretty 50%.
Yeah, 60, 50. Yeah, if once you add in trim, probably 50 to 40. Yeah, ouch.
Whew. Right, that's why brisket prices are always.
Especially getting to the summer months.
It's coming, right?
Yeah.
Tis the
Coming
season.
up.
Tis the season. All right. One last question. Brisket is a fatty cut, right? And there are a lot of one of the things that I love about barbecue is that everybody's got their own method. They've got their own opinions, their own right, but everybody's willing to share, right? And there is a large school of thought out there that brisket's already a very fatty cut, right? Even if you get a select brisket, there's a lot of fat going on there, right? And you're going to low and slow it anyway. Make the case for why brisket with more marbling should be what people should be considering.
Oh, without question. I mean, we've even done studies here. If this is we actually took USDA Choice Certified Angus Beef and Certified Angus Beef Prime and smoked them. Although it's fatty cut, but you're gonna get more marbling within Certified Angus Beef Prime. And when you're reducing that moisture, which you lose a lot of moisture in that cooking process, what you started with is the only thing you got. So you need to have whatever fat in there possible in order to retain some of that moisture because you've lost the moisture from the water. So you need the moisture from the fat to actually lubricate your mouth and help you enjoy that eating experience. Otherwise, you literally are drying out a piece of meat and there's no fat to aid in that bite later. I mean, it is, one of my professors said, you can't make good ice cream out of pig poop. I mean, you've got to start with quality stuff in order to end with
Only
quality
a meat
stuff.
scientist would have an instructor who comes with that line. That's fantastic.
What if you grew some koji on the pig? I mean, I'm just saying, like,
actually, koji
we
is
shouldn't
a good
eliminate
thing.
anything.
That's a good thing to explore. Like to quick age a brisket with koji is a good idea to explore that. Like that could increase a little umami
yields
on
on
it.
that.
The yield. You might help with the
Fish
yield.
sauce.
Fish sauce is great. Well, our friends up in Cleveland at Larder, Jeremy Omansky and Kenny Scott. I mean, that is the impetus of their pastrami that's gotten so many awards. They do a pastrami start to finish in 4 days because they started on curing koji. Like,
It's crazy.
It's pretty cool.
It's amazing.
To Di's point on cuts, I mean, the flat, in a perfect world, you'd have a certified Angus beef brand prime flat and a certified Angus beef brand traditional, like an upper choice grade point, so that you have a manageable amount of fat on the point and then a more abundant on the flat. That'd be a perfect cut right there.
Troy Hadrick, rancher, if you're out there listening, can you grow some cattle like that?
Working on that, would you, on the rancher side? Come on.
Well, how about as you increase in marbling, is there a change in yield though? I mean, I think about the yield, especially when I see some of these like A5 cattle. on the high end, and yield seems to go down as marbling. Now, deliciousness obviously seems to go up with more marbling as well. But is there a significant change in the yields off of these?
Now, when we looked at for that study before, when we actually did look at yields, there really wasn't a difference in overall cook yield. Now, but if you enter in Wagyu into the category, which we did not have during that study, but you have to think about trim yields as well, and that is one big. It is a one big issue with Wagyu, period.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of where it's coming from, usually they have more days on feed, so that's why from a production standpoint, they just simply cost more. But then you have all that excess fat in order to reach that end grading point. So now there's a lot more trimming that you have to do. You better have some outlet for that fat, some way, shape, or form, or else you kind of just paid a lot of money for something you're going to throw into a bucket.
So it's trim loss before you end up with cook loss.
Yes.
Okay.
Gotcha. So it has less to do with cooking yields, more to do with just overall. Interesting. There are hogs like that too, right? I mean, some of the.
Oh yeah, we've definitely experienced that in events we've been part of with the whole hog, where it's just, it's once it's there to enjoy, it's just you can put lane lines with the fat bath that's in the middle, this pool of fat. You put lane lines that swim across. There's so much fat in the middle of those.
Remember the first 17th Street barbecue that?
Yeah, they had this. It was a really interesting breed. What was the breed that were?
I forget.
Tank and his.
The
guys was it Ossabaw? Yeah, that's it.
But then Mike Mills coming up afterwards, he goes, well, I use commercial hogs, and I just he knew. But
there's a place for these special breeds, and it just maybe wasn't at that moment.
I think that I mean, if you think about it, like you said, Wagyu, you do have a lot of marbling in it. I mean, it is one of those experiences, but it's also, you have to think about from a yield standpoint, from a business standpoint. So, I mean, if you want to have that experience for sure, but there's still nothing wrong. Thinking about pigs, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a commercial hog. There's nothing wrong with a conventionally raised animal. It's done in production standpoint for a reason. So,
we are a world that eats a lot of meat.
Yes.
As we have found out. So,
and it is a high quality, complete protein that more people need to enjoy.
Well said.
Thank you.
Well said. On that note, I do believe it's time to put a wrap on it. 30 minutes just flew by. Chef Ollier shows up and it's like...
nothing.
Right?
Chatterbox.
Right?
Here, huh?
Tony Biggs, by the way, you've been replaced because you took the day off.
No way. Just say you cannot replace the Biggs.
The legend.
There's no way to replace the Biggs. This is a golden microphone I'm in front of, guys.
Well, we already said it. It's got a tinge of fish sauce to it, right? If this is your first time tuning into the Meat Speak podcast, thank you, by the way. We're nearing the end of season 2 here. Not quite. We've got a few more weeks to go yet, but know that you can find us across all of your major podcasting platforms, including Apple, Google Play, Spotify, or by visiting certifiedangusbeef.com/podcast, or find us on the Instagram, meat_speak. Slide into our DMs. That's what all the cool kids say these days. And we'll probably respond to you because we don't get many DMs. So, so thanks for tuning into the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the Certified Angus Beef brand. What a glorious day here in May. We're talking all things Pectoralis profundus, Pectoralis superficialis, right? We can talk about lean versus moist or fatty or whatever, but understand, if you want to make Diana Clark happy,
superficial.
Let's go back to the Latin.
Let's do it, people.
That's right. We can do this. We can do this. All right. On behalf of Certified Angus Beef, meat scientist Diana Clark, Chef Michael Ollier, and although he's not here, Chef Tony Biggs, we appreciate you and thanks for listening.